because the Navigator app is designed to
I
make
would do
things
this
work
job
with
even
people
if I were not
who are
being paid
connecting
for
with each
it.
other
Oh, the
in our
problem
neighborhood.
it's really a passion.
People in my family that are dealing with
Partnerships,
generational health issues,
share
Sure.
Have any
knowledge.
questions? Welcome to Healthier Habits, where we dive into health and wellness challenges and connect you with local resources here in Chicago. I'm Cassandra Zumba.
And I am Kwachi. We're your policy, systems, and environmental coordinators with the Chicago Partnership for Health Promotion, a program under the Office of Community Engagement and Neighborhood Health Partnerships at the University of Illinois, Chicago. So let's introduce our lovely guest today. We have Raven Brown from the Green Era Community Coordinator from the Urban Growers Collective. And then we have Liz Bosarge from Zero Waste, who is a program director at UIC, where we also have Lydia Vulich, UIC, and a civil material and environmental engineering student. Round of applause for our lovely guest here. So to kick us off, each of you introduce yourself, the work you do, and then the organization you work for.
Hello. My name is Liz Bosarge. I am the Zero Waste Program Director at University of Illinois, Chicago. I also serve on the boards of the Illinois Food Scrap and Composting Coalition and the Chicago Recycling Coalition. In my role at UIC, I try to focus on the 3 R's that we all learned in elementary school, which is reduce, reuse, recycle. And we try and focus on those things in that order because that is how they have the most impact. So reducing, and in the context of food waste, reducing food waste, right? Reusing what we can. So hopefully the food from this event doesn't go to waste. It can be given away or taken home for leftovers. And then as a last option, recycling. And so in this context, again, that would be composting. So trying to approach our waste in that order to have the biggest impact.
So I'm a civil engineering student at UIC, and I work with the Food Recovery Network, which is a group of students that work to recover food from UIC dining, UI Health Cafeteria, and then also Rush University Medical Center. And we do this 5 days a week, so every weekday. And we bring the leftover food to the Franciscan Outreach Homeless Shelter on West Harrison. And we're always looking for more places to bring if we have the capacity to do it.
Hi, I'm Raven Brown. I'm from the Green Era Community Coordinator with the Urban Growers Collective. The Green Era campus is one of UGC's 9 farm sites, one of the 9 farm sites located in Auburn Gresham community. And the campus is mainly focused around clean energy, green job production, around that, urban farming, and then community education and development. And so we have a lot of our programs that we're starting to roll out are some Saturday volunteering, but then we also have goals to be able to connect community members with the green space, with urban farming in the area, and then develop a community composting program.
Thank you so much for sharing. So the first question to start off this conversation is, what is food waste? How much of it are we dealing with it in a nationally and local level each year? For whoever would like to start the conversation.
I would be willing to start. I will just go out and say that food waste is one of the world's stupidest problems. This does not need to happen, or at least not on the scale that it's happening. So food waste is food that is grown, harvested, prepared, or sold, but simply not consumed. So resources are lost when food is not consumed because of all the work it takes to produce, transport, manufacture, prepare, and sell it. So food waste occurs at all points of the supply chain, but where it happens the most is in our homes. So 43% of food waste happens in our own kitchens because we didn't understand the date labeling, because we didn't eat it soon enough, because we forgot about it. So that's one of the highest priority areas. besides the home, restaurants and grocery stores. So another 40% of food waste happens in that area. So anyone else want to jump in there?
Yeah, and kind of speaking to some of those numbers as well, we know that in 2010, in the United States, we had about 133 billion pounds of food waste that was happening, and that made up about 20 to 30% of all the waste that was being landfilled. So like 20 to 30% of waste that's going to landfill is food waste, and that actually contributes majorly to greenhouse gas emissions. In the state of Illinois, about this similar proportion of the amount that's being landfilled, and that makes up about 30% of methane gas emissions that are actually happening at our local landfills in the state of Illinois. So I believe in Illinois, the amount of food waste is from 2015 from the U.S. Department of Agriculture was around 7.6 billion pounds of food waste every year. And then the city of Chicago by itself produces about 55 million pounds of food waste every month. So there's actually quite a lot of wasted food that happens from the national to the state to the local levels, just kind of all the way down.
Yeah, so to go further into like defining food waste, so there's like edible food waste, which can be food that's left from your plate and you're tossing into the garbage, or there's like edible food waste that had gone bad, so it's spoiled, and so it used to be edible but is no longer, and so it goes to waste. But then there's like inedible food waste, which is like the peels and like stuff that you cut off from the food that you're preparing. And, it can be kind of like iffy where that line is between edible and inedible, because some parts of food that we don't always cook with or eat can still be used in other ways. And then in terms of like the quantity of it, Raven gave some good like large numbers, but the Food Recovery Network at UIC, I did some averages from the numbers we collect on the weight of food that we collect and bring to Franciscan Outreach. And every weekday, on average, we pick up 210 pounds of food just from the 3 places that we pick up from. And so if you put that to scale, there's so much opportunity to recover this food.
And I'll add a little bit more because I love sharing some numbers here. So the world's farmers, they already produce enough food to feed 1.5 times the world's human population. So despite that, despite all the food that we are producing, globally, we still have 795 million people going hungry. 38 million of those people are in the United States, and 12 million of them are children in the United States, even though we are producing more than 1.5 times the food we need to feed the entire global population. According to the National Resource Defense Council, in the United States, we waste enough food to feed 150 million people a year. And then I will share one more. Talking about food waste, a way to visualize it, because it is hard to like grasp these large numbers. So imagine walking out of the grocery store with 3 bags of food and just leaving one in the parking lot every single time. That's kind of what we're dealing with. So for a family of 4, what that amounts to over a year is about $1,866 of lost food a year.
With such high numbers of like food waste and food insecurity, what are the main causes of food waste, and how do we see that impact the environment or the economy? Anyone can go.
What are the main
Causes.
the main causes of food waste? We've been knowing about like kind of where the main causes of food waste kind of come from. I break it down similar to kind of that national, local, and even more local kind of level. So, food waste kind of happens even from the food production side. So when, you have a lot of these farmers and manufacturers, they produce really large scale of food for wholesale purchasing and for people to be able to get to their grocery stores. A lot of that food, in the process of transporting it to locations, it can spoil. There's also the costs and environmental impacts of storing that, because that also contributes to those greenhouse gas emissions from all the trucks that transport. So you kind of have food waste that happens even just from food production. So like manufacturers, if it spoils before it can get to a store, it actually ends up just being landfilled oftentimes if it doesn't go to like an anaerobic digester or an incineration facility. So that's one of the first ones. As far as where it occurs, then another location it occurs is when it gets to the grocery store. So a lot of grocers have a lot of value on the appearance of food. A lot of the marketing around food is that you want food that isn't blemished, food that looks nice shiny apples. And so when that kind of imperfect food does make it to the grocery stores, people, be less likely to buy, or like different appearance kind of things. So grocers just won't put those to shelf, or they'll and that food ends up going into landfill. So it also happens at the grocery level because of these different market conditions. And then when it gets to people's homes. So at that consumer level, it happens when people are, buying more food than they end up cooking, or when they cook food, storing those leftovers, maybe it doesn't get into a freezer, and then it ends up going to waste because people usually, if they're not nearby composting locations, it ends up just going into their trash bin, and then that goes to landfill. So there's those three kind of locations where it occurs, and it has those impacts environmentally and economically. Like when you think at the consumer level, in terms of the economics, you're not getting as much bang for your buck when it comes to food waste, because you have all the food that you buy every month for your groceries, but then you don't get to use it all, or you don't get to repurpose it as compost because you're maybe not aware of that as an option, and so then that doesn't get used. And then at the environmental impacts is, again, the increase of those greenhouse gas emissions at landfills.
So to touch on like the main causes, I think a lot of it is mismanagement of the food or mishandling of the food. And so it could be in terms of like the storage of the food in the grocery store. Maybe the fruit that is going to go bad faster isn't put towards the front for people to pick up. Or similar to like the shelving, like the older canned goods aren't put towards the front, they're left in the back. But that also occurs in the home as well. When you like look in your fridge, everything in the back is not going to be like, that's not going to be your first grab when you go into the fridge. And so if people change their perspective, or I guess their behavior on how they store things in their home, they'll be more likely to use it before it goes bad and becomes food waste. And then with like annual waste, to add some more numbers to it, I found a number from from ReFed, which is Rethink Food Waste Through Economics and Data. So they give a lot of good data on food waste in the States. And they said that 120 billion meals go uneaten every year. And that's equal to 1.4% of the total United States gross domestic product. So just lots of wasted money on this wasted food. And then, so like Raven mentioned, the greenhouse gases that are released because of this food being wasted, like not only the greenhouse gases that the food emits while it's going to waste, but also all of the stuff that went into creating this food and also getting it to where people can purchase it and finally eat it. So looking at the amount of food that the Food Recovery Network at UIC saves every day, it saves the carbon equivalent of over 1 million miles of a passenger car driving So the 210 pounds that we pick up every day, that's assuming that like maybe some of it gets composted because there's back of the house composting at the places where we pick up from, but the majority of it is going to the landfill. And so being able to recover that food saves carbon and methane from being released into the atmosphere.
All right, interactive portion. So how many people in the audience toss out food when it reaches the sell-by date? Go ahead and raise your hand if it reaches the sell-by date. And you're like, no thanks, I'm tossing it. Okay, a few of you. All right, how about if it reaches the best by date? You're like, okay, that's it. It's going in the trash or compost bin. Okay. How about the use by date? How many of you toss it when it reaches the use by date? Okay, I see a lot of hands that did not go up yet. So who's still hanging on to their food after that? Gonna give it a go. Oh my gosh, wow, okay. So, little known secret, I guess. Those dates are not regulated federally. So the federal government is not mandating when you put what date you put on your product, except for baby formula, because it loses nutritional value after that date. But so those date dots or those date marks are not federally regulated. They are put there at the manufacturer's discretion. There's like secret calculus behind it. So it has to do with like, some of it's maybe safety, but a lot of it's also like quality, like the color or the smell or some characteristic of it, like the right texture, and not all of it's directly related to the safety. Also flavor is another one. But also, maybe it's just to move product a little faster, make it rotate through your shelves, make you toss it out so that you buy the brand new thing. So it's a big source of confusion, and without the regulation, it's hard to know when it's gonna be safe to still consume it. However, if you looked in the mirror today, maybe you remembered that you're still an animal, and we have all these senses that we're equipped with, right? So we can look at it first and see, if there's any clues, is it still gonna be safe to eat? Is it turning green? Okay, yeah, then it's done. You can smell it, give it a sniff test. And then if it passes those tests, you can give it, this is what I do at home. I'm not saying you guys need to go home and start doing this too, but this is what I do because I don't wanna waste food. So what I'm trying to say is because these aren't regulated, they're not an indication of safety. And so you can still usually eat food past those dates. And they put them up like earlier than they need to be because of overly concern. The other thing I want to say about environmental impact is our food production globally uses 50% of the habitable land. 50% of the habitable land is used to produce food for humans. It's also 80% of the freshwater resources are used to produce our food. 77% of the land we are using for our food production is to feed animals. So it's to feed livestock that we're turning into hamburgers, or feed chicken, or to feed our dairy animals. So it's not even food we're going to be consuming directly. And then also consider that in the context that the UN estimates that the largest threat to endangered species is habitat loss. So we're overproducing, we're producing enough food to feed 1.5 times the world's population. We've used half of the habitable land to grow food, mostly to feed animals that we're gonna eat the meat of or the dairy of. And that could have been used for plants, or a lot of that could have been given back to animals to live and to increase our world's biodiversity, which is highly threatened. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate all the statistics you are sharing, all three of you, because it gives us a better idea of the magnitude of this issue, right? And I also like the tidbit that you gave us about the sell-by date and how it's not regulated. And it perfectly leads into my question of how does food waste intersect with food insecurity?
Yeah, I can touch on that a bit. So the goal of the Food Recovery Network, which is a national organization and UIC has a chapter, is to fight food waste and feed people. So stopping that food from going into the landfill and giving it to people to eat, you can see the direct correlation between food waste and food insecurity. But then also, I guess, touching on like maybe like a lack of access to fresh, like nutritious produce. Like a lot of that can be because of like the companies not wanting their food to go to waste, and so there's a lot of preservatives put into it, and that alters the food that we're eating, and so that's an effort to prevent food waste for like monetary reasons. They don't want their products to not be sold before they go bad, and so that decreases our access to nutritious foods that maybe fill us up more rather than like the empty calories that come from some packaged foods.
Yeah, and kind of adding to that kind of idea, the question was about food insecurity and how food waste is tied into that. A lot of that correlation is fairly direct. For example, Urban Growers Collective, we serve a lot of the south and west sides of the city of Chicago. A lot of these areas are predominantly Black and brown, and also predominantly food desert type locations. So these are areas where people aren't getting that access. What a food desert is an area where people might be able to access some types of food like fast foods and things like this, but they're not able to access that fresh produce, that nutrient dense food items that are actually good for people's health. And these have impacts in terms of people's perceptions of their access to food, for example, that they have to travel very far to be able to access, healthy foods to be able to eat. That's a form of food insecurity. And then it also has the impact on people's long-term health. I remember one of the statistics I'm trying to remember off the dome was that 1 in 7 Americans are considered food insecure. And of that 1 in 7 Americans, 1 in 3 African Americans, specifically in Chicago, are in these kind of areas where they're dealing with that food insecurity. So all of this food that's not going into people's mouths, that's being landfilled, is food that could be redirected to help address these food insecurities as a first step. So first step would be redirecting that food to food pantries or these different food kitchens, or like I said, the communities that need it. And then other steps would be to be able to recycle that food and prevent it from being landfilled.
There's also, at the restaurant and grocery level, there is some concern from those generators, sellers, about donating food. Sometimes they don't feel like they're worried about liability. However, during the Clinton administration, there was the Good Samaritan Act that was passed that protects them from that liability as long as they donate in good faith, that the food is still wholesome and edible. A lot of places still don't know about that, and so it really does have to be explained to them. And so there are some organizations, of course there's a lot of organizations, and technology and apps that are trying to address that. But just getting the word out, because this is an act that was passed during the Clinton administration. I was a child back then, and we still don't know about it. So,
Can you guys hear? Okay. So today's topic is about reducing food waste, right? And I think, Raven, what you touched on, like food waste happens on multi-tier, and one of the tiers that food waste happens on is like consumer level. So we're all here to learn. So what are some practical strategies that we all can take at home to reduce food waste?
Yeah, so since I would say that there's a variety of ways that people can start to address food waste, in their own lives. One of those points I was mentioning with the that consumer level kind of interest has to do with like the food that people get from grocery stores. So kind of like different like strategies within meal prep to be able to like have an idea of like, oh, this is maybe what I'm thinking about making for this week or for this period. Being able to store food before it expires. So if you have meat that you purchase from the grocery store, you have, produce that you can freeze that can help preserve it for a little bit longer until you're ready to consume it. And then also at home composting. So that's, I think, one of those things that people are kind of learning more about. There's a lot of helpful tutorials online. There are also a variety of like urban farms throughout Chicago that are, engaging in this composting work and might be hosting workshops and educational seminars about it, where you can also learn there as well. Urban Growers has one of those, but it's also a way to be able to get more from your food. So if you're interested in growing your own food, you can actually compost certain food items from your fridge instead of putting them into the trash. You can use that compost that you make at home to be able to put that into your soil in your garden and be able to grow nutritious food from that. Think of it like plastic or paper recycling, but for food.
Yeah, so I guess the best way for me to explain this is kind of based off of Liz's like reduce, reuse, recycle ideology. So to reduce like the amount of waste that is created in your home, you can learn how to best store your food. So like Raven mentioned, freezing meat when you purchase it if you're not going to use it right away. I'm sure many of you store your onions in a dark cabinet. Keep it cool, keep it dry. There are specific places in your home that certain foods should be stored. Some of them shouldn't even be stored in the refrigerator, even though maybe they might be sold in a refrigerated or cooled space. And then know what you have and use it before it goes bad. So I like this app. It's called Supercook, and you can put everything you have in your pantry, your fridge, whatever. So if you have an item that you're like, oh, that's gonna go bad soon, or like it won't be good to use soon, you can put it into that app and it can give you a recipe if you're unsure of like what you wanna make out of that ingredient. And then sharing with other people. One thing that my mom always taught me was to always have food on hand. If you're not the type of person to like hand out money to someone you don't know, have some food. And if you have leftovers, hand it out. And then if you make excess food, share with your neighbors, share with your family, share with your friends, if you won't end up eating it. And then kind of with the reuse side of things, you can repurpose food that might not be at its peak quality. So my favorite thing is like stale bread turned into French toast or a French toast casserole. It rehydrates the bread so you're not eating something that's like crunchy that shouldn't be crunchy. There's a lot of opportunities like bananas that are overripe turned into banana bread so you can enjoy a sweet treat. And then turning into like compost. There's food scrap collection in Chicago. It's not always accessible for people, but there are different drop-off sites in Chicago that you can bring that food that you might have let go bad in your fridge, or the stuff that you cut off from the foods that you're preparing. So.
Raven and Lydia hit almost everything I would have said. Well done. I only have a couple more to add. Big fridges are so wasteful because it's so easy to lose food in the back of the fridge, or if your fridge has a lot of drawers, if it's out of sight, it's out of mind. And so make sure to visit your fridge often, rotate things that are older towards the front to more visible locations. Anything that you can put out like on the table, like your fruits and veggies that you want to eat sooner, put those where you're going to see them a lot. Also, maybe have a dog. That one helps me finish my food. And then I love what you said about like being a soil builder and like using that finished compost to grow what you're going to eat next.
Thank you for that. What you mentioned right now, one of the apps, there's another app that I use as well that turns like care packages, I guess, of a restaurant's food that they haven't sold and lets them go for a lot cheaper. The only thing is that you have to kind of be conscious of what you're getting, right? They offer from any type of restaurant, so you just gotta make sure you make the healthy choice, right? But I think that's a good use of the restaurant side to also try to help to reduce food waste. So through that app, you can see whatever's available around you and purchase it as at a fraction of the price, helping yourself kind of not have to waste so much money, but also helping on the end of the food waste. I also want to give the opportunity to Raven for you to share a little bit more about what you do in Urban Girls Collective. So if you can tell us a little bit more about the Green Era campus you have.
Yeah. So as I shared a little bit at the beginning, the Green Era campus is a renewable energy and urban farming hub that's located in Auburn Gresham community. I met a couple Auburn Gresham neighborhood residents when they stopped by the table today. So there's like a lot of excitement around it because it's kind of one of a kind facility, not just in Chicago, but in America. So anaerobic digestion is a technology that we've actually had for a long time. It's one where you essentially take food waste and you convert it into renewable natural gas. And then you also have the solid byproduct, which is the compost that can go into urban farming operations. Now, most anaerobic digestion facilities, the waste or the kind of digest state that they have as a result of their processes are not the same as ours because they use a variety of waste sources, whereas we use pure food produce. So that's what makes ours into that compost that can actually be used for farming in that nutrient-dense material. And so one of the highlights, again, of the campus is that kind of circular economy focus where the way that the economy is kind of set up in most cases is that you make something, you use it, and then it goes to some kind of waste or landfill processes. Our campus helps to redirect that waste from the landfill and then give it new use. So instead of thinking of it as food waste, you can think of it as another type of resource that is not contributing to those greenhouse gas emissions through the process of the transportation and then the way that the waste decomposes at landfill sites. And so that's one of the aspects of the campus, but also what makes it unique is that it's located in the area like right downtown Chicago. So a lot of the cost that's involved with landfilling waste of all kinds is that it has to travel. And so the cost of the transportation to get out there, by having it in Chicago, that 55 million pounds of food waste that has to travel elsewhere to get to a landfill can instead be brought right into a location right downtown Chicago, and the community gets the more direct economic benefit of having the facility there. Because in addition to the anaerobic digestion building that we have on campus, recently finished the construction in Ribbon Cutting 4, we're also building urban greenhouses on the campus where people will be able to kind of do more high-tech, urban farming on the campus, as well as an education hub, community center, where people will be able to engage with live cooking demos and be able to learn more. There are a couple other features of the campus as well, but the idea is that it's truly circular, where you tie in the benefits to the community, into the economics of how it runs, into clean energy production. So you have the economics, the health, and then also that clean energy that makes it a circular kind of model. You can kind of think of it as like a small pilot of what we would want our larger food system to look like, where all of these different separate parts are all interconnected into one central location that benefits people.
To give Liz and Lydia an opportunity, thank you for that, Raven, to answer. The question is what role can composting and food waste recycling play in turning waste into a resource?
Yeah, this is extremely important because City of Chicago ordinance prohibits the opening of any new landfills within city limits. Go figure, right? We don't want any landfills here. And then Cook County followed suit a few years later. So there are no landfills in Chicago or Cook County that can be opened. And that's been in place for over 30 years. So like Raven said, our trash has to travel further and further, which puts a higher and higher carbon footprint on it. And the landfill capacity in Illinois is below 20 years before we need to start building new landfills. No community wants a new landfill. So we don't want to make our waste someone else's environmental justice problem. And so we need to address it as locally as possible. So I can share a little bit about what City of Chicago is doing, which is not nearly enough. Recently, they did open up 20 drop-off locations for food scraps and compost, which is a really good move for them. They have been a little bit behind the ball. Sorry, City of Chicago. Hopefully, no one's too offended, but I do appreciate that effort. In Illinois, there are 68 municipalities that have some sort of food scrap curbside drop-off program. And so we are one of the top states in the United States that are putting forward these programs, which is really good. And then, I wanted to mention too, the nearest the nearest compost drop-off location to here is at 611 West 69th Street. So if you have food scraps, and I don't know, do they compost here at Kennedy King? Okay, well, if not, then you could bring your food scraps to 611 West 69th Street. But those are some of the initiatives that are happening for food scrap recovery and composting.
I would just add that it, going back into the circular economy, thought process, it goes back into the soil and it provides nutrients to the food that we're eating in Chicago, that locally grown food in Chicago. And Shelby mentioned in the previous panel over in the other room that this organic, these organic nutrients are more easily accessible for the plants to absorb compared to the inorganic or unnatural fertilizers that are often used for farming practices.
Thank you again for the great answers you guys provided. It seems like in each of your organization, you guys are starting some new technology or system to reduce food waste. Can you give us a little bit more information of those innovative ideas that are coming about and how that can support community agriculture or renewable energy efforts?
Yeah, so with the Green Era campus, like I mentioned, it's kind of a pilot of of a new kind of system, especially for America. Some other countries actually have similar kind of technologies and kind of thought processes that they've been implemented. But there hasn't been one of those that are actually in our country. And again, within the Chicagoland area specifically. So I would say that the kind of technology that the Green Era campus is piloting more than the anaerobic digestion and the compost is the concept of the system itself, of that circular economy, of that idea of, being able to reuse food as a resource and then having that direct community benefit from it. So I would say that that's kind of something that is being modeled here in the Green Era campus, but then that can also spread beyond just the kind of campus model into a broader, idea of how the city of Chicago as a whole can start to model those type of things.
Yeah, what Green Era is doing is amazing because that is what can work in a dense urban environment. In most parts of the country, the way that compost is dealt with is in these big windrows. And for those of you who aren't familiar with what that is, imagine a compost pile in your backyard where it's like a mound of compost. So at scale, when you see on your packaging, industrially compostable only, what that means is it's going to a facility where it kind of looks like a farm, but instead of growing crops, it looks like big rows of dirt that are 12 feet tall. And those get really hot as they're breaking down. And they get turned inside out, so they get their oxygen. But it takes a lot of space. And so there's one location in Chicago, I can't remember, Harborview. It's at the Harborview site. They're on a closed landfill, and they do the windrow composting. Takes a lot of space, though. And so what Green Era does with anaerobic digestion is you can do the same thing in a much, much smaller footprint. And so that's something to really watch And hopefully we see that being reproduced in other places. Another technology that is also emerging locally is static aerated piles, which is, imagine that compost pile again, but instead of turning it over, turning it inside out so it gets its oxygen, there are tubes running like below it and then forcing air through it so it gets the oxygen so things aren't breaking down anaerobically, which is what creates that methane, which is that potent greenhouse gas that's 80 times, has the global warming potential of CO2 for its first 20 years in the atmosphere. Other technologies, so at UIC, they recently started using lean path technology, which is like measuring their food waste. And then they also document like what food is being wasted or not being consumed. And then that helps them right size their ordering. And so looking at reduce, reuse, recycle, that helps them look at what doesn't get eaten and then addressing it higher up in the value chain.
Okay, so we have addressed of what the problem is within food waste and how it's been produced. We also talked about a little bit of how individual groups are doing to combat that. But what do you think is holding us back? The biggest barrier that's implementing at a larger scale, and what are cities in general, not just Chicago, just not taking into account or not doing?
So on the like reuse recovery side of things, the hardest part about doing a recovery program is the communication. Things get lost in communication all the time. If you're at a location to pick something up and the communication wasn't there beforehand, they might not be ready to give you the food, and then that creates a time issue. But then there's also like delivery logistics of like, how are you going to get the food there? Do you need a vehicle? Is it close enough that you could cart it over with a wagon or one of those push carts? So that's something that plays into it. And then just finding people to do the actual like physical labor of bringing the food to the location and coordinating with them to make sure they're available when the food's ready and that the food is ready when they're available. So.
So one of the things, I know you didn't come here to listen about the price of eggs, but we don't pay as much for food this day and age than historically we have. So for example, in 1910, the average family spent 41% of their income on food. In 2020, it's about 11%. I know it feels expensive when you go to the store, but food is almost a steal these days. So there's kind of an economic disincentive to do the best thing with our food to prevent food waste. A lot of times it's just cheaper to landfill it than to figure out how to donate it or how to compost it. So that's a big barrier. There's not really good financial incentives. There's not clear policy. We talked about the Good Samaritan Act earlier. Confusion over date labeling. So there's a myriad of problems. It's one of those things that we would call a wicked problem because it has many sources, which means that there's not going to be a silver bullet. There's not going to be a single solution to prevent food waste. There's going to have to be multiple strategies from multiple stakeholders.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with that. Like there is multiple steps to it. One of the things I think also that gets undernoted is the willingness to have the change. So I immediately thought of bell hooks, the will to change, like when I said that. But I was thinking also, you know, just like the way that the industries historically have kind of like run, they're used to a certain kind of process where it's like, I make this, I use it, it goes to landfill. Make it, use it, goes to landfill. One of the things I can kind of touch on a little bit in terms of like policy changes, I think that that's one area that a lot of people don't have as much education around. So it was mentioned extension of the Good Samaritan Act that helps with food pantries being able to get access to food. There was an amendment that was actually made to that act to improve access to that food, to expand like the sphere of protection around it. And that was in December 2022. There's also even more recently than that, like this past March, there were 2 bills that were introduced to the Illinois Senate that are around food waste processing and then creating a compost market around food waste. So kind of like I was breaking down, there's that first step of food, being given to people to eat, like they purchase at a grocery store. If it doesn't go there, then it goes to food pantry, which is connected to different kitchens to make sure people get food that's served. If it doesn't go there, being able to have animals to be able to eat food if it's still consumable. If it gets to the point where it's not consumable anymore, instead of going to landfill, making sure that it goes to a digester facility where it then gets, like I said, processed, and that offset of the methane gas from, instead of going into landfill, going into like use of a clean energy source. And so that's kind of what that food waste bill is around. And then again, that compost market bill is kind of around being able to create a space where, this specific food waste is then being like used for urban farms, for different people's community gardens, so that there is that circularity. So the policy level, while slow and painful, is also one of the levels where we see the change. I'm now thinking about Mr. Rogers, look for the helpers. And so I think about that because I think that's one of the areas that people, like holds people back, like on an individual level, but then on a larger level, it's just not knowing where these different cool projects are happening. Like beyond even just like our Green Era campus, I know there are hundreds of urban farms and community gardens throughout the Chicagoland area, but do you know where yours is? The one that's closest to you. So I think that there's a kind of, it's at a like industry level, I think is kind of where there's more of that, like it's just in the kind of overarching structure of it. It has to do with the different economic incentives and the kind of growing pains that come with change. But then I think that there is the kind of disconnect of like, well, how do I get engaged? Where do I go? And I would say, for me, I start off as a volunteer with Urban Growers Collective. Before that, I was actually a volunteer with FRN, and I was an intern with the UIC Office of Sustainability. So I just started as a college student who was learning about engineering and didn't really know what I was trying to do with my future. And then I learned about these different opportunities, and that got me interested in food and sustainability. And then from there, I started volunteering with Urban Growers. And then from there, that's how I got where I am. So I think that it's one of those things where, on the individual level, it's like, I think of it as like baby steps. So I think look for the helpers and then think of it as baby steps. But then also like in those baby steps, learning about these other cool things that are happening, like these different bills and these different programs that are available in the area. So it's a little long-winded. Go ahead.
So much for sharing. And I think, Liz, we were also talking about, I think out there before the podcast started, about how you can start one way to you, Raven, what you said, and then a few months later, a few years later, you are in a total different space. So what's one thing you want people to walk away with from today's conversation? I think I got don't go by the used by or sell by date. That's my one takeaway. But what do you want people to take away from today's conversation?
Okay. So, I mean, the broader context of this is land usage and climate change, loss of biodiversity, food access. My one takeaway is just going to be like, eat your leftovers. Just eat your leftovers. That's all you got to do.
So my one takeaway for you all is that there's enough resources for all of us. We just need to distribute them properly. So it kind of goes along with the share food that you won't eat, get involved in some recovery efforts, some food recycling efforts, and
and then my takeaway is going to be that classic, like I said, look for the helpers. And then also those baby steps, if you're learning about it for the first time, take your time learning more about the different aspects when it comes to this issue of food waste.
Eat, move, save.
Thanks for listening to Healthier Habits. We hope this conversation inspired you to make the healthy choice the easy choice.
If you enjoyed this episode, please support the podcast by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Don't forget to turn on that notification bell so you never miss an episode.
Head over to healthierhabits.podbean.com to catch up on past episodes and find all the links and resources mentioned in today's show, or click around here on YouTube for more videos.
Thanks again for tuning in to Healthier Habits. Until next time, take care of yourself and stay healthy.